just find yourself a friend. Lay down your defenses and fears. You're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm excited to bring you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. I'm a civil human minister, and so what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. And it's in that effort that I'm approaching my own spiritual heritage by looking at the Christian Bible to try to see Jesus' teachings, to find those things that I feel are applicable across the board to all humans, regardless of our different faiths or our different politics or different lifestyles. I truly believe that there are beautiful, important, and useful teachings that we can apply right here, right now, 2,000 years removed. So we are in our series on today's Pharisees. And I'm doing essentially a comparison between the religious leaders of Jesus' day, 2,000 years ago, and the religious leaders of our day, 2,000 years later. And I think that you will see, and maybe in the past shows you have seen as well, that there are direct applications, and they've been a bit eye-opening for me, to be honest. Let's go ahead and jump into the passage today. It's Matthew chapter 23, verse 15. It's just one verse today. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel land and sea to win one proselyte. And when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. That's not a whole lot of content there, but it is a whole lot of rebuke. And I want to set this up a little bit because this is pretty intense what Jesus is saying right now, and incredibly offensive, and would no doubt have really upset the leadership that he's sitting in front of right now in this specific setting. So right now Jesus is in the temple, and that's this big building that is where all the religious stuff happens for the kingdom of Israel in the capital city, Jerusalem, in Israel. And right now it's Passover, so it's one of the most important holidays of their years. And hundreds of thousands of Israelites have pilgrimaged to the temple to do their annual worship, to offer sacrifices that they need to do penance, to pay taxes and offerings that they're supposed to pay. So it's a big deal. And it's one of those times in the year where people get to hear from new and different teachers. And a lot of them would flock to this temple area and sit and teach on the steps or in the outer courts. It essentially was a place where people could get to hear what's new in the world of ministry or in the world of rabbis. Jesus isn't the only one in particular, or especially right now in Jerusalem, that does have students and disciples and that is teaching, but he's unique, specifically because he ministers to those that are untouchable. He goes to the sick, to the lepers, to the blind, to the mentally ill, to the poor, to the blue collar and working class individuals. That's where he spends all of his time, speaking and teaching them. And in fact, many of his students are in fact people of these selections, people who've worked in human trafficking, fishermen, individuals who are tax collectors on behalf of Rome, for instance. Matthew is one of those people who collects taxes for the temple, actually. And so these are individuals that are quite a cross-section of the people that have, up until this point, not been represented. And this is where Jesus, right now, he's been attacked by all these different religious leaders and groups in the temple, and now he's kind of firing back. This is Jesus's lobby towards the Pharisees and scribes, the people that he's talking about right now. This is him going through, there are 8 woes. In other words, like a woe is a word that describes grief or beware. It's like pay attention because this is a terrible thing that you're doing. And that's what woe means in in this language back then. And so Jesus is saying this too, and he says, "Woe to you, Pharisees and scribes, you hypocrites." Now we know what hypocrite means these days. It means somebody saying one thing and doing another. And it's exactly what it meant back then. In fact, it's the same word, hypokrites, which is the Greek word that's used here, from which we get hypocrites. And essentially, it's an acting term. So Jesus was calling them actors. In other words, they're putting on a show for people to see, but really, when the curtain's drawn, when the show's over, they live lives that are completely removed from the good virtues that they're supposed to be upholding. And so Jesus is addressing each one of their major weaknesses right now. It's actually really exciting for me because I get to see a Jesus in this account that's different than the ones that we typically see, of the sort of meek and humble and quiet and passive Jesus. This one is throwing people out of the temple, is turning over the merchants and vendors' tables and telling them to get out, and now yelling at the Pharisees and scribes, who are like the religious leaders. It'd be like us going into, in the U.S., for instance, going to the U.S. House of Representatives and yelling at the representatives these things. That's what it's like for him right here and now. So it's pretty tense. And I want to talk about what it is that Jesus is talking about here and help show you how this directly applies to us today, right here and right now. So let's go ahead and look at the verse. So he begins with the, Pharisees and scribes, you're hypocrites. And Pharisees and scribes are two essential, all qualifying, basically, terms that mean religious leaders who are supposed to know the law and teach the law and be examples of the law. And the law is this set of a bunch of different rules, not only from the Ten Commandments, which you may have heard of, but also from a number of cultural laws that have to be employed. When you're supposed to eat, what you're supposed to eat, what you're supposed to sit by, what you're not supposed to sit by, how long your hair should be, all of these things. And I kid you not, it gets even more detailed than that. So these Pharisees and scribes are supposed to be the experts in it and also practice it themselves. And Jesus has rebuked them seriously in the last few studies that we've done for being hypocrites, for telling people to live a good life, but then doing something that's completely unvirtuous. And today he's attacking the missionary Pharisees. So he's talking to them and says, "Woe to you, because you cross land and sea and in an attempt to win just one convert. But in fact, when you win this convert, you turn them into twice as much of a son of hell as you are." I mean, I don't know about you, but if I were to say that to a pastor today in church, or just to even a common missionary in the church, people would be upset at me as being incredibly rude and incredibly insensitive. So I just want to give you a picture of the dynamic that's here and that Jesus is conveying right now. So what's he talking about? In the language here, these people are traversing is a word probably, but going about essentially traveling to across the seas and across the deserts. This dry land is actually the phrase used here. And essentially they're meaning they're going to the places that nobody's gone before, to places that are remote and difficult to get to. And so he's making an emphasis on how much work they put in to going so far away to find one single person, just one, he actually points out, to just make one convert. And this convert is a word that essentially means somebody who draws near. And it really is used in the term of a foreigner who's coming into the land of Israel. That's what they use the term to describe, as somebody who draws near, usually a foreigner. But it usually, when it gets to this point, it means that they have accepted the Jewish religion or accepted certain parts of the culture that they will also embrace. So we get the word proselyte. Well, I'd probably say a repentant would be somebody, a convert's the best word. And so this individual has adopted what the Pharisees and scribes are teaching. And what does Jesus say about this in particular? He says, you have made them sons of hell twice as much as you are. This word twice as much, it literally does mean 2 times the amount, but it really connotes in this language the fullest extent possible of somebody becoming something, the fullest extent possible of whatever we're talking about. So in other words, he's saying, not only are you a son of hell, but you're making these converts completely and unabandoningly a son of hell as well. Son of hell essentially just means descendant of Gehenna is the word here. And hell in this context, we've talked a little bit about before, but Gehenna is this garbage dump really for Jerusalem. It's a section of land that they've set aside where they keep a constant fire burning, where they will put, for instance, the remains of people who have passed, or of garbage and refuse that needs to be taken out of the city for sanitation reasons, and they put it into Gehenna, where it's consumed by fire, and fire that never dies is also a term that you'll hear. That has become pretty loosely interpreted and has become a very different picture of what Jesus was talking about then. You know, we have this Satan with a pitchfork in, this fire and brimstone place where people are being tortured forever and ever and ever and ever without mercy and without end. That's not what Jesus is saying here. And I just want to make that a point. He's talking about Gehenna being this place where people are placed to perish, to die. In other words, they're not going to continue living. So what is it that he is suggesting that is making these people so much worse than the Pharisees? So the Pharisees themselves are governed not only by the laws that they follow, but they're also governed by social constraints. There are other people who follow these laws and hold them accountable to them, at least they're supposed to. And so these religious leaders, although their practices and in secret they are really doing terrible things, stealing from the poor, teaching laws that are burdens to people that they can't uphold, and not even doing anything to help them. These are the kind of people that they are. But because they live in a society that believes the same thing, they're kept from doing anything too extreme. They can't get away with, murder, if you will. Now, a proselyte, somebody who is converted over, they may come from a land where that isn't the case. And I want to talk about this because this is really important for us here today. This individual who's converted not to the faith that Jesus is talking about, that the Jews are supposed to believe, but are converted to this law and this set of purity rules, this burdening set of minutiae rules that people are required to follow to be pure, to get to heaven. Jesus is pointing out to the Pharisees, you're supposed to teach compassion, forgiveness, mercy, humility, peacekeeping. These are the virtues you're supposed to teach, not all these laws. And when they teach these laws to the new converts who are coming in, they are free to engage them without any checks or balances whatsoever, because their land may not actually have anything like it. And so the bad teachings that they're getting from the Pharisees will find their complete conclusion and work themselves out to their logical conclusion. It doesn't make sense at first right now, but I want to explain why this is important, especially today. So how does this apply 2,000 years later removed? Does it have any message for us today? Absolutely. It really does. We have our own religious leaders, right? Ministers, pastors, priests, fathers, bishops, cardinals, the list goes on. And even within many different religions, we have leaders who are responsible for teaching these things. But just like 2,000 years ago, when Jesus' leadership was heaping all kinds of crazy requirements on the people, so the same today. Our religious leaders are heaping upon people all of these requirements with what they're supposed to do. You can't drink, you can't smoke, you can't chew, you can't hang out with these people, you can't gamble, you can't, I mean, just the list is as long as my arm. And we require people to do this because we want them to be good people. Jesus' whole point is a totally different take on this. Rather than teaching people what not to do, we're supposed to teach people what to do. And those things are being compassionate, are being forgiving when somebody comes to you and asks for forgiveness. It means loving our enemies. It means doing good to those who hurt us. It means creating peace instead of division. And it means speaking well of others. These are not the cases in many of our churches today, I'm sad to say, and especially with our missionaries today. Now, this hits pretty close to home for me because my father has been a medical missionary for a very long time, since I was in junior high, really, probably 12 or 13. He started taking our family to the Philippines, actually with one pastor who had been there before. Went to the Philippines, took boxes of pharmaceuticals. We set up a makeshift clinics there in the barrio villages in the Philippines. And then we would hand out medication. My dad would see them, and the rest of us would help in whatever way we could. And I actually went one time before I actually ended up leaving for college, and actually a couple of different things that I participated in. We spent all this time collecting the pharmaceuticals. We went over there, we set up this clinic in the middle of the jungle somewhere, and it was really a wonderful experience, I will say. It was really important for me as a human being to see that culture and humanity is exactly the same as it is everywhere else in the world, with different clothes, with different language, and different music. But, and here's the frustrating thing for me, so many times missionaries have taken the bad parts of our modern take on Christianity and have made that the platform that they stand on when they go to the foreign worlds, or at least foreign to the Western civilization, to instruct them on what it means to be Christian. I want to talk about a couple points in particular of where this has been exactly the case, and where we could apply the words of Jesus right here and now to our religious leaders. There are two particular ones. The first one is one that's close to home and that I've spent a lot of time working on in the last 20 years, working across the board to build peace and common ground on, and that is LGBT people in our religious congregations, in our churches especially. My particular take was on conservative Christianity, helping to step into that audience and to be able to talk with them, since it's where I came from. And I'm very familiar with the theology, and so I was able to present to them a new way of looking at this issue that provided room in the pew for people who are coupled as gay individuals, and lesbian and gay. That particular platform is something that the American church, and in some cases Australian and some others as well, took to the foreign field and made as a major platform. Not being merciful, not being compassionate. It wasn't about being forgiving or peacemaking or loving. It was about excluding those who were sinners, excluding those who were bad. And it meant that LGBT people were kicked out of their homes, out of their churches, out of their communities. And I talked about how when Jesus says, "You've made converts twice as much a son of hell as you are," regrettably, it's the same way in many cases, especially in Africa and Russia, where this message of intolerance, this message of unique discrimination against one particular people group was preached and preached and preached. In the States here, we have civil rights, which means there's only so far that a church or a community can go in ostracizing somebody or in separating them from their community. That's not the case in these other countries. In these other countries, they could get away with beating them, with stealing from them, with killing them, with torturing them. I wish to God that I was not, I wish to God that I was joking, or that I was being exaggeratory, but I'm not. I've had to talk with those individuals who are trying to help LGBT individuals internationally. I've had to listen to the stories of individuals who were beaten to an inch of their life because of something they could not change. These ministers have been taught to be this way, and because they don't have the civil rights, they work this poor teaching out to its extreme. And that's how they become even twice as bad as the ones here. And the second thing is this, the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel was something that was very popular when I was really working on being a minister and participating in the community at that time. And that is that the more money you have, and the more you give, the more God gives back, and the more money you get. So I give $10, I get back 20. I give $20, I get back 40. That's really what is taught. And it seems to work in the US because we have considerable amount of money, because we're incredibly privileged and incredibly wealthy compared to what other people have to live with. But when you take that teaching to the Congo, or to Uganda, or to Kenya, or Nairobi, Kenya, but South Africa, or any other developing nation, Singapore, Malaysia, back in the day, you're talking about taking from the poor and telling the poor that the more they give, the more they'll get back. But in their society, they don't get back. In America, we have a generous economy that allows us to get back. It allows us to work to get things that we want. In those countries, it doesn't, which means that these individuals would give out of a desire to be good to God and to be good people, but would in fact cripple themselves and put themselves in danger. All the while, sickeningly so, their ministers live in absolute luxury. Members of country clubs, living lavishly and eating lavishly, and in fact brag about it, because in this particular teaching, it means that they are blessed by God because they have so much money. And the reason why I bring these two things up is one, to show how humanity really has not changed in over 2,000 years. We've advanced. We've made significant social developments. Even now, even today, democracy, this new concept that we've been working with, the idea of people being free and to be able to vote for their leaders, is even being tested right now. But more than that, we as human beings, our emotion, the way that we think and process, the way that we interact and have relationship with one another really has not changed. And so these teachings do possess important lessons for us. Lessons that our religious leaders don't always get it right. And sometimes they get it really, really wrong. And that's when we have to stand up and to stand for what is right. That's when we have to stand up for compassion. It's when we have to stand up for peacemaking rather than dividing, for speaking good of other people rather than slandering them. That instead of making accusations and claims without proof, we provide evidence if we are going to bring a charge against somebody, and that we exercise restraint when we have to show discipline or aggression. I so much appreciate your participation in this. I know this is kind of an intense particular set of studies, but it really is intense in the passage here. And in the story of Jesus here, it's incredibly passionate and incredibly intense. And so I hope to communicate some of that. If you have thoughts or reflections or comments, I love it when you put those in the comments, because it helps me to grow as a person and it helps other people to learn. You are the only one in this universe who can think and consider things the way that you can. No one else can. That's a gift and a value that I appreciate and would love to have you share with me. And also, if you're on Facebook, please like the page. And if you're on YouTube, there's a button right down here. You can press to subscribe. so that way we can keep in contact with one another, because we've got some really exciting things coming up. So until tomorrow, when we sit down together live at noon again, I want you to know that I love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we have any control over. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving those around us the same way. Thank you.